My introduction is very brief. I want to start by saying thank you to the organizers, David Kersey, who's on this call. Thank you, David, for pulling this together. Thank you, Amanda and Jean-Claude. I really appreciate your help. I'm coming to you from Saanich, British Columbia, which is on the southwest corner of Vancouver Island. And I'm on the traditional territories of the Esquimalt, the Wisanic, the Sauk, the Songhees, and the Secwepemc First Nations. We have a lot of First Nations here on South Vancouver Island, and this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. One of the reasons I went into law is that I felt injustices had been done throughout our history to Indigenous people, and the best way to resolve them was, again, if you can mute everybody, Amanda, that would be great. And the best way to resolve these injustices would be through the courts and through legislation in our legislatures. I live here with my wife, Annemiek. We met over a legal opinion as young lawyers at the Department of Justice in Ottawa, very romantic, and my youngest daughter, Rebecca, who is going into grade 12. I have 3 other daughters who have gone off to university or on their own now. Et j'aimerais aussi dire que je suis bilingue et je pense que c'est très important pour notre parti d'être un parti bilingue. Et si vous avez des questions en français, je vous encourage de les mettre dans la boîte chat ou de juste faire comme ça et puis on va se parler en français. It's important to me that the people feel comfortable asking questions in English or in French, which is what I just said. Again, feel free to type in your questions in chat. I'm going to say 3 quick things before turning it over to questions. First, my vision for Canada. I really believe Canada needs to become a leader again, and especially a leader on climate action. The science is clear. We have 5, 6, maybe 7 years before climate change becomes irreversible. And to deal with that at the planetary level, we need a Canada that's a leader, that shows the way how to get off fossil fuels and onto renewables, how to build an east-west electrical grid powered by renewables, and how to be a conservation leader internationally. To get there, I'm convinced the Green Party needs to win more seats in the House of Commons so we can hold our government to account in Ottawa. And I have many ideas, which I'd love to discuss with you in the question period, on how Greens can start to win more seats. We have 3 seats now, 1.1 million Canadians voted for us, and we need to go to 20 seats and hold the balance of power. Or we need to go to a majority government over time. Maybe not this election, but let's build towards a majority. And I'd love to talk about how we can get 338 ridings operating in full speed, how we can build a movement of movements across Canada. And I have some ideas on that I'd love to chat with you about. The last thing I'll say is about me. I have some unique things to offer to the Green Party. One is that I've actually knocked on doors in New Brunswick. And I campaigned for Megan Mitton in the last provincial campaign. And I'd like to recognize Eric and Margaret. I think that Eric and Margaret Tzu King are on this call. Tuz King are on this call. And they were my billets, and I really appreciate their hospitality. I'd also like to say that I am very bilingual. J'ai appris mon français quand j'étais jeune. Et ça aide beaucoup quand on apprend jeune. J'ai aussi fait mon barreau de l'Ontario entièrement en français, les cours du barreau. Et encore plus important, j'ai joué au hockey dans des équipes francophones à Ottawa et à Aylmer et à Gatineau. Alors, I speak both kinds of French, sort of the legal French, and also a French that resonates on the doorsteps with voters. It's one of the reasons that I was asked to go to Memram Cook Tantramar and knock on doors for Megan, is that I could speak French in a way that people on the doorsteps would understand. And for New Brunswick, for Quebec, for Eastern Ontario, as you all know, it's essential to have a leader who can campaign on the doorsteps in English and in French, someone who can win debates in English and in French, and I offer that. Last thing I'll say is that I can win my riding here in Esquimalt, Saanich, Sooke. And I'm the only candidate who ran in 2019 who's able to win their seat, who's running for the leadership right now. I got 26% of the vote with a fantastic team here. We had 200 volunteers, 2,000 lawn signs. We came a close second. We thought we were going to win until about the last 10 days, and then the polls started to slide. I can talk about that too if you have questions on that. And I'm a real fan of regional campaigning, helping local campaigns to decide what their priorities are, how they're going to spend their money, and really encouraging people on the ground, empowering people on the ground to run great campaigns. I've campaigned for over 30 years, for many, many years across the country. This is the last thing I'll say. I'm the only candidate in the leadership race who has campaigned on winning green campaigns from Atlantic Canada to British Columbia, coast to coast, federally, provincially, and municipally, because we have green candidates municipally here in BC. So that's what I offer as leader. For those of you who like to multitask, you can go to davidmerner.com and take a look at my website. You'll see two very important buttons there. One is volunteer, and the other is donate. And if any of you can spare anything at all, no amount is too small to help defray our campaign expenses, I'd really appreciate that. So that's it. Thank you very much again for tuning in. Amanda and Jean-Claude, let's take a look at the chat box if there are any questions in English and French. Other people, if you just want to raise your hand, we'll acknowledge you, and you can just ask straight out by unmuting yourself and asking a question. But Amanda, how does it look on the chat box? Are there any questions there?
There sure are. We have two questions. The first one is from Norm and Mecca. They ask, how will you as leader help us win elections here in New Brunswick?
Norm, I will be out there to knock on doors, just like I did with Megan Mitton. I think it's important for the leader to come out and help work on the ground. Elizabeth May has a great way of fundraising. I think she raised over $20,000 or $30,000 for Megan in the last provincial campaign. I see Sabina Dietz is on this call, and she would be able to tell us exactly how much it was. But the leader should be out there inspiring volunteers to come out and work, recruiting really great candidates who really represent the full diversity of New Brunswick, Anglophones, Francophones, people from the local riding who can win campaigns. And we need to nominate our candidates early and help our riding associations to campaign between elections. I traveled across Canada in February and March, and I went from here on South Vancouver Island to Vancouver, to Calgary, Regina, Winnipeg, Thunder Bay. I made it all the way to Montreal before COVID-19 hit, so I had to come back and I couldn't make it to New Brunswick. But my feeling from talking to people across Canada is we need better organization on the ground. We need riding associations that are fully functional in 338 ridings with money in the bank when the campaign starts, so that candidates don't arrive and find out, oh, there's no money in the bank. We have 3 volunteers. This is a big job, right? We need to figure out how to campaign between elections and sustain our organizations between elections. And the leader has a key role in that. As leader, I will hold every 2 weeks a call with our riding CEOs. And the other weeks, every 2 weeks, I will hold meetings with our candidates or past candidates and to try and encourage people to keep going between elections. I really believe the leader has a role on the ground in recruitment, in volunteer engagement, and in fundraising. Thank you for the question.
Okay, great. So our next question, just a minute here. Our next question is from Tom McLean. As Greens, we like to say we do politics differently. What do you think Greens should be doing to demonstrate that we do politics differently?
Tom, great question, because I think we are different, and it's critical for us to retain our difference. One of the things that the polling shows is that Canadians see us as the party of good ethics, a party of integrity. And I think that's really critical. People saw Elizabeth May as a leader who consistently demonstrated good ethics and real integrity. And that's a huge difference for us, between us and the other parties. Another thing that's really different for us is that the other parties always talk a good game between elections and during election campaigns, but they consistently fail to deliver. We look at the Trudeau Liberals as the perfect example. In 2015, remember the promise, 2015 will be the last first past the post election. They broke that promise within the first year. They adopted Stephen Harper's greenhouse gas reduction targets within the first year after 2015, after they'd criticized them during the campaign and for years before. So we need to be the party of integrity and ethics, and the NDP has the same problem. Here in British Columbia, John Horgan, our premier, campaigned on saving the old growth forests, and now they're cutting down more old growth on Vancouver Island than even the old growth forests cut down when the Liberals were in office. So we know that the NDP, the Liberals, have this track record of serious issues around ethics and integrity, saying one thing in campaigns and doing the opposite in government. And Greens are special that way. The other thing is how we campaign. And I think it's really important in this leadership race as well. We campaign in a positive way, not in attacking and negative style, attack style politics. And I think we must stay on the high ground. Some people say, well, that's one of the reasons we don't really win at the end, is we're not tough enough. But I think you can be tough on the issues, but generous and kind and thoughtful in terms of the people and how you engage when you're talking about other people. So I think those are some of the ways that we're different, and these are the differences we may need to maintain. One last thing, other parties say, we can do this with small steps. Let's just take some small steps and we'll fix our economy, fix the environment. The time has passed for that. I think Greens need to be campaigning on a bold, ambitious, big change agenda. And that's another key difference between us and the other parties. Thanks, Tom, for the question. Did you want to follow up on that, or does that answer your question? Thank you. Jean-Claude, est-ce qu'il y a des questions en français? Est-ce que vous voulez poser une question en français ou non? Are there any questions in French, Amanda?
There aren't at the moment.
Okay, that's good.
We did, Robert Shado had his hand up, so I want to call on Robert to ask his question. And Robert, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Thank you for that. And I just have to add, I think you made the first person ever to get my name right. So thank you.
Great.
I guess, and thank you for putting this on, David. Thanks for coming here. I got some questions, I guess, in terms of, and it's more like a, and sorry, I don't have video on right now. I apologize for that as well.
That's okay.
It's a question about messaging in the Green Party. I like how you mentioned that during your campaign style that you were building, let's say, and not being aggressive and not hitting the Liberals, and I really like that. But I've kind of seen a switch with the Green Party as a whole in terms of how they're advertising themselves online. And personally, I find it comes across as not building and not doing what we say we do at the doors and what have you. And I just want to know your take on terms of how the Green Party messaging should switch going forward for our next election. Because part of that is how we build people, how we bring people in. So I'd love to hear your opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. In our last campaign, and as you say, online these days, we have a lot of negative campaigning. Some of you will remember our slogan from the last campaign, not left, not right, forward together. So there are two negatives and one positive in that slogan. And my favorite approach is positive, positive, positive. And so rather than saying, you know, oil is dead, which we have been campaigning on in the last month or so, let's talk about the positive, how we're going to move to renewables. And let's even talk about Alberta, how it's moving to renewables already. Let's talk about the town of Raymond, Alberta has gone all solar in its municipal infrastructure. How the town of Hinton, Alberta is leading Canada in geothermal power generated from orphan oil wells. Let's emphasize the positive and how we're moving forward together in a strong, positive way. If the Green Party can move off sort of being the party of no, I think we are going to have much more success with voters in New Brunswick, in the interior of British Columbia, on the prairies, people are looking for a message of hope and not fear. And for us to be saying, as I even did earlier in this call, to be honest, I said, we only have 5 or 6 years before climate change is irreversible. That's the best scientific evidence. But we have to be really careful about not looking like we're saying the sky is falling, disasters are coming, right? So it's a bit of a balance. We want to be truthful. We want to talk about the science, but we also want a positive, hopeful message. And so there's an art in how we communicate. And I would love to shift our communications towards the positive, remembering that we're an evidence-based party. We depend on science, but there are good ways to communicate that, and there are some negative ways to communicate that. Last point, Robert, online in many of these Facebook posts, we see a lot of negativity from Greens toward each other and towards the leadership. And I think we need to create a new culture in the Green Party of positivity, of hope, you know, the kind of Jack Layton hope wins over fear. That's, I think, where we need to move in our online communication with each other and with Canadians generally. Does that answer your question, Robert? On to the next one.
Yeah, we're good. I sent a little message. We're good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Amanda, how's it looking?
Sorry about that. Yes, the next question is from Ruth Breen. Can you discuss your views on government legislating workers back to work during a labor action?
Ruth, I did a master's in labor relations, and I really believe deeply in the importance of collective bargaining and enabling unions and employers to resolve their differences through collective bargaining, through negotiation, if necessary, through arbitration, and not legislating workers back to work. And I'd go even beyond that, Ruth. I would say that we need to pay attention to some of the legislation in Quebec and other jurisdictions where they're saying that replacement workers are a source of real conflict between workers. And we should be looking at Quebec's legislation around banning replacement workers. That just leads to violence on the picket lines and an imbalance of power that favors employers over workers. Having said all that, Ruth, I also recognize that in terms of key services, for example, our postal service, people, you know, who depend on their welfare checks or their EI checks, not getting those checks, it's a serious issue. It affects their ability to feed their families and feed themselves. So I can see occasions for those kinds of situations where if it looks like the employer and the union are just not able to come back to a compromise agreement and people are paying the price, then in some limited situations where it's an emergency situation like that, you could perhaps justify it. Do you want to follow up on that, Ruth, or does that answer your question?
Yes, I will follow up if that's all right.
Yeah.
Thanks for your answer. We are actually postal workers. So just to touch base on that one, when there is any labor action with Canada Post, historically, every single labor action, postal workers have gone across the picket line, gone in, got the old age checks, got the unemployment checks, and delivered them to the customers. Yes. So during no labor dispute have we ever stopped getting checks to Canadians.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify that one.
That's really helpful. And I don't know our platform in the last campaign for Canada Post, but we pretty much adopted the proposals of the Canada Post unions and put forward some really progressive ideas on how we can turn Canada Post into a source of banking services, a place where we respond to climate emergencies. And I hope you had a chance to see our platform last time in 2019, which was really, really progressive on a new role for Canada Post to make sure that we keep it viable and strong across Canada, not just in our urban centers, but across Canada in all small towns and large. I think we had a fantastic platform on the future of Canada Post. Thanks for the question. Amanda, over to you.
Sure. The next question is from Brian Beaton.
Mm-hmm.
The nuclear industry is ramping up its efforts to secure billions in government funding to continue its efforts to support this very expensive energy solution. New Brunswick's Conservative government wants the feds to pay for at least one new reactor, maybe two, under this small modular nuclear reactor project. What is your position on continuing to support the nuclear industry in Canada?
I'm really looking forward to see what New Brunswick and Saskatchewan and Ontario, three Conservative governments, as you point out, are going to come up with, because they're teaming up to look into small nuclear reactors and whether there's a future for that. I said earlier in this call that we're an evidence-based party. We look at the science and the engineering science, and I believe we need to do that for nuclear as well. But based on the current science and the best data we have from the expert engineers, it looks to me like small-scale nuclear or large-scale nuclear is too slow, it's too expensive, and it's too risky for us. As I said earlier, the climate scientists are saying we have 5, 6, 7 years to go before climate change is irreversible. We will not be able to bring on new nuclear in that time, given the regulatory framework in Canada. We also know that solar and geothermal and wind power technologies are already out there, much less expensive than nuclear, much faster to bring on stream, and much safer. So I say two things. One, let's look at the evidence. If the nuclear industry can show that, yes, this makes sense, then we're an evidence-based party. Let's follow the evidence. But the evidence so far is that it will take too long, it'll be too expensive, and it's too risky at this point. I'm very happy to discuss that in further detail, but my view is we need to focus on the most cost-effective way of getting up renewable energy right away. Last thing I'll say, if nuclear power is viable, surely the private sector will invest in it, and there'll be a return on investment, and the private sector can make this work. I am not a fan of the federal government stepping in and putting hard-earned taxpayer money into projects like the twinning of the Kinder Morgan pipeline or the building of new nuclear plants, because my sense is the private sector is probably better placed to figure out whether this is a smart investment or not. Would you like a follow-up on that one, or is that good? I think we're good. Over to you, Amanda, with unmuting. You're muted, Amanda.
There is a comment, sorry, from Brian Beaton here. Mm-hmm. He did say that evidence from other efforts around the world showed the disasters and spread of radioactivity, destroying lands and waters and creating sacrifice zones everywhere. Yeah. So that was his follow-up.
Brian, thank you very much for that. If you go to davidmerner.com and you click on events, one of the events we have coming up is with a doctor who is an expert on the sort of toxic impacts of uranium development and nuclear power plants. And we're holding a session on the health impacts of uranium and so on at the end of the month. So davidmerner.com, click on events, and we're going to have a session with Dale Dewar, who was a candidate for us in Saskatchewan, Dr. Dale Dewar. Thank you for following up on that question.
All right. Our next question is from Luke Randall. How will you inspire better communication within the party?
Luke, as a leader, as I mentioned earlier, I will be on Zoom calls with EDA leaders, CEOs, the chief executive officers of our riding associations every 2 weeks, or their delegate if they don't want to call every 2 weeks. And we'll be discussing what can we do on the ground to mobilize our volunteers, empower our frontline workers, fundraise more effectively, and prepare the way for the early nomination of candidates. If I'm elected as leader on October 4th, I will start right away traveling the country, and meeting with local riding associations, recruiting volunteer candidates on the ground. My plan is to get in an EV and drive across the country and recruit a fantastic team of candidates who represent the full diversity of Canada, and a team of volunteers as well. That'll be on the ground communication. From Ottawa, we have a great crew in our office in Ottawa, but they are very few, and they are doing a lot of rowing right now. And what we need to do is help our staff in Ottawa do a lot of steering. And that means every volunteer stepping up. If every single one of us on this call sold a membership, we would really be transforming the party. I've had, dozens and dozens of these calls. I say the same thing on every call. Let's get our membership inspired and working. It doesn't take much to sell a $10 membership to a family member or a neighbor or a work colleague or a friend. Let's get every single one of us selling one membership. That's all, $10. Tell your friends there's a sale on, it's only $10. You can shape the future of the Green Party. This is our most important decision in 14 years. Who's going to be the next leader? The other thing I say is go to the people who took lawn signs in your riding last time. Put together a calling team and just call them and say, thank you for taking a lawn sign. And did you know there's a leadership race on? And it's only $10 to get involved. You can choose the next leader of the Green Party. So that's what I always say on these calls is let's empower our grassroots volunteers just to do a couple of basic things which would really transform the party. And the leader has a key role with that kind of message. If it comes from the leader and the leader is doing it, him or her or themselves, it'll have a huge impact on our membership. So leading by example in how we communicate and what we communicate on is really key. Helping our staff in Ottawa to communicate with the members on our key priorities is also helpful. Any of you who are interested in learning more about how to organize between elections, we have a fantastic young organizer in Ottawa, Erin Sylvester, ERYN.Sylvester, SYLVESTER, at greenparty.ca. Ask Erin to do a presentation for you on organization between elections. They're fantastic presentations. So we need to team up and get people working. We don't just work between elections. We don't just work, 3 months before the election. We have to work between elections consistently. Barack Obama said, politics is 95% perspiration and 5% inspiration. And so that's what I offer as leader, is a lot of hard work on the ground.
All right. Luke, did you have a follow-up at all? Nope. Okay, I guess we'll go to the next question then. The next question is from Kathy Zwicker. There were problems in seniors' healthcare. What is your vision for, regarding a national plan for housing, healthcare, and other supports for this age group?
Kathy, the pandemic has really showed us that our long-term health care for seniors is badly broken. And I think we need to seriously look at the idea of bringing long-term care under the Canada medical, the medical system in Canada, Canada Health Act, with more federal funding and much, much closer supervision of how long-term care facilities are operating. Our hospitals operate under very rigorous review procedures. They're public, and I think this is one of the models we should be looking at for the housing and care of our seniors. I don't think it's enough, though, to say that private sector long-term care is a disaster, because even the publicly owned long-term care facilities have had serious problems in them, especially in Ontario. So we also need, in addition to looking at that, we need much tighter regulation, and we need serious inspection powers to ensure that long-term care facilities are properly inspected and that the inspectors have the power to suspend licenses temporarily to ensure that these care facilities comply with the regulations. The best jurisdiction in the world, from what I've been able to learn, is Australia. The inspectors have the power to suspend licenses for non-compliant facilities, and 16 such facilities were had their licenses suspended in 2019 in Australia, 0 in Canada. And I think if we bring in better inspections, better regulations, more serious enforcement, we'll be more than halfway there. But I do think there's a very good argument as well that the pressures in the private sector to cut service, to reduce cost, and so on, mean that, like our hospital sector, this might be an area where we need public ownership and public control. I'm not an expert in this field. My background is in government and law, but I do think we need our experts to take a look at this. The Green Party's called for a royal commission into this question, and I'm a real supporter of a commission of inquiry into how we got into this situation. Thank you. Amanda, you're on mute.
I've got to get used to that. All right, so we're actually out of English questions. Oh no, one just popped up. Sorry, this one's from Robert Shado. Again, what are your opinions on degrowth?
Robert, degrowth is a really sensitive topic in certain parts of our country. And it's similar to and not because it's the wrong thing, it's because of the language. The issue around degrowth, which is saying we need to start cutting and cutting the size of our economy and so on, is it scares a lot of people. Having said that, I also believe that we cannot sustain a constant growth capitalism, a constant growth economy in a planet that's finite. It just doesn't work. Those two things don't go together over the long term. And we need to figure out, how do we frame this for voters in a way that doesn't scare them off? It's the same problem some candidates in this race are campaigning on abolishing the police. And I don't think that language really connects with Canadians. Degrowth is another concept that I don't believe connects with the regular Canadian voter. So we need to frame it in a different way. We need to say, there are other countries in the world that have figured out that constant growth capitalism, constant growth in our economy isn't the key measure. What's really key is well-being. New Zealand's brought in a New Zealand well-being budget. Jacinda Ardern brought that in when she became Prime Minister. And 2 months ago, they brought in this fantastic budget that focuses not on growth, but on well-being. And I think Canada should follow that example. Let's focus on the right things. Let's measure the right things. And then we will convince Canadians that we are responsible, we're credible, other countries are doing it, and Canada should too, if we want Canada to be a leader.
All right, so I think we have a comment here from David Kersey. Oh, yes, it is a question. How can we do a better job of policy development that better takes into consideration regional sensibilities and perceptions? We have lots of talent spread throughout our EDA artists, musicians, scientists, engineers, and ecologists. We can do a better job on science-based policy.
Yes, we can. I'm a real fan of empowering our membership. And as you say, David, we have unbelievable members, unbelievable volunteers. We have so many PhDs and people with master's degrees, and a New Brunswick person, Janice Harvey, was a key part of our platform development team in 2019. I was in the shadow cabinet working on justice reform issues. That was my professional life, was working on deep change in the justice system. She was working on pulling together all our different ideas. And we have some fantastic talent also in our membership. But it's very hard for our members to connect up with policy development. It doesn't make sense to me that members have to travel every 2 years, sometimes across the country, to participate in policy development. We know from COVID-19, we can connect through Zoom, we can do online conferences with 1,000 people, we can vote online, the technology is there. We make it easy for our members and our volunteers to play a personal role in developing policy, giving their input. I do think that the leader has to follow member policy, but can also help shape policy, especially in our campaign platform. And that's what I would do. Really enable all volunteers to participate through modern technology, and then build on what our members are telling us and shape our platform in a really strong way. But it has to start with the membership. One of our 6 core values is participatory democracy. And if we require our members to travel across the country, like I'm planning to go to Charlottetown in October, but many of my friends here in British Columbia are saying, there's gotta be a better way that's better for the environment, better in terms of cost, and more inclusive for people who just cannot afford to travel. Let's not discriminate against people who do not have the same economic means as the well-off people in our party. Let's really open up the party to all people. So I'm a fan of that. We can do better. But I also think that figuring out how we connect with the PhDs and the master's people through our shadow cabinet is a key way to go. Our shadow cabinet is starting to figure this out. We should be creating committees of experts to support our shadow cabinet members and also our 3 fantastic MPs, so that the policy is flowing through our party, to the MPs in the areas that they're responsible to, through our shadow cabinet experts as well. Let's really open up the process. David, I hope that answers your question. Feel free to ask me a follow-up if you wish.
All right, I think it's time to check in with JC. JC, did you want to open it up to any French questions?
Yes, Jean-Claude, if you want to unmute, and Anna Girouard, I see, is on the call too. Anna, vous m'avez posé une question hier. Vous êtes le bienvenu de me poser des questions aujourd'hui aussi. Jean-Claude, any questions or comments?
No, I meant to tell you that Anna was in the room. Anna a une question en français pour David. Elle est peut-être muette. Maybe she's mute.
Ah oui, Anna, il faut enlever, si vous descendez.
If she can, Miranda, would you see if Anna Giroir is muted?
Yes, I'll ask her to unmute there.
Very good.
Peux-tu ouvrir, Anna?
Oh, there we go, we've got Anna.
Oui, merci. C'est que, ayant été candidate à deux reprises pour le Parti vert, je déplore encore qu'il faut payer 10 piastres pour être membre d'association au lieu, c'est important de le faire, mais on pourrait vendre des arbres pour les planter, des petits arbres comme levée de fonds pour fonder une association. Une autre chose que je n'ai pas dit hier, c'est que je regrette énormément que le Canada doit payer des prix de fou de l'uranium alors qu'il y a une compagnie Orion à Montréal qui a fondé des plaquettes protéonomiques pour identifier les maladies plus vite que l'uranium. Et le Canada achète à des prix faramineux de l'uranium. Il faut changer complètement le système de l'association du Parti vert et le système de santé.
Merci beaucoup. Excellente question. Just for everybody on the call who may not be perfectly bilingual, there are 3 questions there. One is about the $10 membership. Why are we charging that? Another is about tree planting. What can we do about that? And lastly, the health impacts of uranium. Et Anna, j'apprécie énormément vos questions. Sur le $10, je suis complètement d'accord avec vous. Si vous allez à CBC, Radio-Canada, et vous mettez votre nom, David Merner, j'ai déjà été interviewé sur cette question-là et j'ai dit on devrait enlever le $10. On devrait ouvrir notre parti pour que ce soit beaucoup plus accessible pour les jeunes, pour les moins bien nantis et faciliter la participation de tous les Canadiens dans notre parti. Deuxième question concernant les arbres. Moi-même, je suis personnellement engagé dans cette question-là. Pendant la campagne de 2019, nous avons planté une centaine d'arbres, notre équipe de campagne. On a fait ça, un événement pour la campagne dans un parc public. On avait organisé ça avec la municipalité de Colwood et on a planté comme événement pour aller chercher un peu d'attention dans les médias et pour encourager nos bénévoles. Une session où on plantait une centaine d'arbres. Dernière question, Anna, sur l'uranium. Si vous allez sur mon site web, davidmerner.com, et vous cliquez sur événements, vous allez voir que justement, à la fin du mois, on fait une session sur les impacts de l'uranium sur la santé publique. C'est un docteur Dale Dewar qui a été candidate pour nous en Saskatchewan qui mène cette session-là et vous êtes le bienvenu. Just a quick summary on that for folks who may not be following. On the $10 membership giving, cutting that to zero, I am a fan of that idea. It costs the Green Party more than $10 to administer the $10 membership fee. So we lose money in administration costs. And it would really open things up, especially for young people. By the way, BC does that already. I understand the New Brunswick Greens do that already. We know it works. It brings in new people, makes it more easy for people to participate. I'm a fan of that. You can go to CBC, Google David Merner, CBC, and you'll see I've already been interviewed on that topic. Second question on trees. I'm personally committed to the idea of tree planting as one of the things that we do in the Green Party because it's the right thing to do. In the 2019 campaign, we had a 100-day of planting 100 trees in a public park in Colwood, British Columbia, part of our riding. It got some media attention. It inspired our volunteers. Let's do it across the country. Let's launch a challenge for every riding association to have one day, maybe on National Tree Day, of planting trees in a public park or even in private property in people's backyards. Third question on uranium and the public impacts of uranium. Public health impacts, sorry. We know the public health impacts of uranium are serious. We're actually having a session on that. If you go to davidmerner.com, click on events, we have an expert, Dr. Dale Dewar, who's holding a session on the public health impacts of uranium on our Zoom network at the end of the month. So I agree, Anna, key question. Merci beaucoup pour les trois questions. Très bonne question. Jean-Claude, est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions en français? Any other questions in French?
Pas encore. Mais c'était une très bonne question et la réponse était excellente.
Merci.
The questions were very good and so was the answer. Thank you,
Merci.
David.
Merci pour la question. Amanda, we have about 10 minutes left before I give my concluding remarks. So any other questions in English?
There are. We've got a question from Rhonda Connell. She says, we have a need for more diversity in politics, including more women in political positions. How do you think we as a party and otherwise create a more equitable and diverse makeup of our government that truly represents our population?
I love that question. And one of the reasons I love it is because I'm male and I'm a white male. And I know many people wonder, is it time to have another male and a white male leading a political party? We have enough of those already, right? Polite people don't ask that in the Green Party, but my daughters ask that. I have 4 daughters, and 2 of them have said, Dad, you should be stepping aside for the women and the people of color who are in this race. And I totally respect that point of view. But what I would say is that to bring in more women, to bring in more people of color, to really become a diverse party, what we need is a leader who creates safe space for others, a leader who's really experienced in deep change, organizational change. And that's what we need in the Green Party. I don't see myself as being sort of a star kind of leader. I see myself as being a builder, a person who creates space so that others can shine. And you know, the analogy of a conductor, rather than having a leader who wants to be in the spotlight, on center stage, right at the front, I would much rather be the kind of leader who is standing there as a conductor and helping the other people in the orchestra to shine, the soloists and the people who are experts at playing the different instruments. That's the kind of leadership I offer. The political science shows that if a woman asks another woman to run as a candidate, that woman who's asked is much more likely to run. So what I need to do as a male leader is step back and allow the women to ask the other women, not just allow, but encourage and support and be there behind them. So they are asking the women to run. Same with people of color. It wouldn't be me asking, but when they needed me, when they wanted me to make the follow-up call, Or if they said, you call first, David, and then I'll call after. I'll follow instructions. As I said earlier, I have 4 daughters. I'm very good at following instructions. And I understand the limitations of having a white male leader. But what I offer that's special is a lifetime in the justice system of deep transformational change. And any of you who have met lawyers and judges or worked in the justice system will know it's extremely resistant to any change. Lawyers and judges and senior bureaucrats in government that I worked with like it is right now, very much. And it hasn't changed much in the last 200 years. What we did in BC is we cracked the code on deep change in the justice system. We had people flying in from Australia and Singapore and the United Kingdom and jurisdictions in the United States. We created something called the Civil Resolution Tribunal. You can Google it. Online, very few lawyers, no judges, all about early resolution, mediation, restorative justice. We cracked the code on justice transformation. And it was because we had a team of innovators and leaders, and I was able to create a safe space for all of them. Very few of them were lawyers, to build deep change. And that's what I offer as a leader. Even though I am a white male, I can't change that, but I can help others to be leaders and recruit and build diversity inside our party. That's what I offer.
David?
Oui, Jean-Claude, allez-y.
Il y a une question en français. Est-ce qu'on peut la poser maintenant?
Oui, allez-y, merci.
Merci. Ça vient de Nicolas Gélic qui dit les résultats à PEI et au Nouveau-Brunswick étaient meilleurs qu'en BC. La croissance du Parti vert est aujourd'hui au Canada atlantique. Quelle action souhaites-tu mener pour poursuivre la croissance du Parti vert et permettre que nous ayons plus de députés ici en Atlantique? Just briefly, if I may, what he's asking is, he says the results in PEI and New Brunswick were better than in BC. The growth of the Green Party is today, it happens to be in Atlantic Canada. What action, David, do you intend to take to keep the growth of the Green Party and allow that we have more MPs in Atlantic Canada? À toi, David.
Nicolas, j'adore cette question. Et puis, vous avez raison. 8 députés à l'île du Prince-Édouard, 3 au provincial au Nouveau-Brunswick, Jenica Atwin au fédéral. Complètement d'accord. Vous nous battez à fond. On a juste 3 députés au provincial ici en Colombie-Britannique. Vous avez raison. Ce qu'on a besoin, c'est un leader qui est capable de connecter avec le monde sur le terrain. Quelqu'un qui peut parler la langue des gens au Nouveau-Brunswick, à l'île du Prince-Édouard, qui est capable de connecter sur le plan personnel, qui est capable de travailler fort, un leader vraiment travaillant sur le terrain, qui adore ça. Moi, je suis le gars pour ce travail-là. J'adore ça dans les 2 langues officielles. Je vais vous raconter une histoire très brièvement. J'étais à Memramcook-Tintramar avec Megan Mitton. On a frappé à une porte d'un fermier, je pense qu'il est 80-90 ans. Et il m'a dit, vous n'allez jamais gagner, vous les Verts. Ce comté a été rouge depuis que Noah a atterri. Et il m'a parié 50 $ que ça allait être rouge encore avec un le blanc. On a gagné par 11 voix. Et puis la raison qu'on a gagné, c'est parce qu'on a cogné aux portes, et avec des francophones et des anglophones ensemble. Et moi, je suis convaincu que c'est comme ça qu'on va battre les libéraux et les autres partis au Nouveau-Brunswick, à l'île du Prince-Édouard et partout au Canada. So I'll just summarize my answer very quickly. As you heard from the question, how can we make sure we continue to win seats in PEI in New Brunswick? And the number one thing I say is leadership. We need a leader who can connect in French and in English on the doorsteps and bring people over, and who can inspire volunteers to come in and inspire candidates to come in who represent the full diversity of their ridings and of Canada. And just a really quick story. I was knocking on doors for Megan Mitton in Memramcook-Tantrum. Met a Francophone farmer, I'd say, who said to us in strong terms in French, he said, you Greens can never win here. This riding has been red since Noah came ashore. and he said he wanted to bet me $50 that the LeBlanc would win again. And I'm looking forward to coming back and knocking on his door again and saying, I'm here for my $50. And I think that's what we need in a leader, somebody who can connect on the ground, who can relate to people, who can win debates in English and French nationally, and somebody who will inspire volunteers to get in the game, to do the hard work of winning campaigns. And that's what I offer as leader. Merci, Nicolas, pour la question.
All right. I think Nicolas ducked out, so we can't get a follow-up. But did you want to do another question in English, David?
Sounds great. We have another maybe 2 minutes. Then I'm going to do a concluding remark. Anybody who wants to leave, feel free. And anybody who wants to stay on, I'll be on until the last person leaves. So I just want to respect people's time, though I know a couple of people have told me they have to leave at 8 for another Zoom call. Maybe what I'll do, Amanda, is do the quick conclusion now, and then we'll turn to that question right after the conclusion, because I know a couple of people have another commitment at 8 o'clock. Does that work?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you again to the organizers, David Kersey, Jean-Claude, merci beaucoup pour la traduction. Amanda, thank you very much for helping us to pull this together. What I offer as leader that's unique is, first of all, a complete comfort in English and French. I'm the only candidate who's campaigned in New Brunswick and who's campaigned coast to coast, from Atlantic Canada to British Columbia, in English and French, on winning campaigns, in the Green Party. And what I believe is that experience is really important for the next leader. The other thing I offer is a deep understanding of the Green Party. I've been involved in the Greens for years, and I've been a shadow cabinet member as the Democratic reform critic, and as the justice critic, the only person in the race who's been in the shadow cabinet in 2 portfolios, working with Elizabeth May and the team. I've seen how our federal council operates. I've worked with our staff in Ottawa, and I know how our party needs to change, how we can become more diverse, and how we can become more effective as a seat-winning party. I also, though, understand the huge strengths of the party, which is really our volunteers, our unbelievably qualified and dedicated volunteers. That's our big strength. And so I'm one of the candidates who understands what needs to change and also what we don't want to change inside the Greens to really build towards the next election. I'm a cooperator, I'm a listener, I'm a builder. I'm not one of these people who looks for the spotlight. Although if the spotlight is on me, like in these Zoom calls, I don't mind that at all. But I do think what we need is somebody who's more like a conductor and who can make the whole orchestra perform in a fantastic way. So that's what I offer. I think that time is urgent as well. Many candidates in this race don't really speak French. They'll tell you they're learning on the job. And we need a leader who on day 1, on October 4th, can speak French, win seats, win debates in both official languages. I think that's a key differentiator. So that's what I have to offer. The last thing I'm going to say is, if you could go to davidmerner.com and click on volunteer or donate, either one of those would be very valuable for us. No amount, as I said earlier, no amount is too small. It'll help us because I'm really hoping to come to New Brunswick. I mentioned earlier I made it to Montreal, and then I got cut off by COVID-19. I was traveling across the country. I'd love to come to New Brunswick if the rules are relaxed and I can make it out there. My favorite thing is to campaign on the ground and come and see folks where you live. If that doesn't work, we'll hold some more Zoom calls, and I hope to see you online. It's 8 o'clock. I'm going to stay on as long as it takes to finish all the last questions. Thank you, everybody who organized this and everybody who came on. À bientôt, j'espère. Merci beaucoup tout le monde qui a embarqué dans l'appel. Et vous êtes le bienvenu de rester si vous voulez. Je vais continuer avec les questions et réponses. Merci.
Okay. All right. Well, our next question comes from Andy Shadrack. David Hughes has just released a policy analysis of LNG production and export out of the Montney in BC that shows emissions from LNG will be 18.5% higher than China, continuing to burn coal over the next 20 years. If elected leader, how would you systematically develop policy to end fossil fuel production growth in BC and across Canada, such that we had a step-down rate of production in order to meet our Paris commitments?
Thank you, Andy. What we need to do is figure out how to move off fossil fuels and onto renewables. We need to provide an alternative that is cleaner, less expensive, and more accessible. And those who are supporters of the Green New Deal will know that by building an east-west electrical grid, the biggest job creation project in Canadian history to help us get out of the pandemic, we can do that. Here in my own riding, the Sauk First Nation has gone entirely off diesel generators. They're on to solar. They know that we can move. And Sauk here in my riding is quite a rainy place, especially in the wintertime. But they are putting power back into the grid now, and they're making money off their solar. Not only that, they've trained up people on the reserve to go across Canada and help other First Nations get off diesel generators and onto solar. So there's an advantage economically there. There's better employment. Let's tell the positive story of how we start to shut down the fracking industry entirely. We were the only party in the last campaign who campaigned on a national fracking ban, like France has done and many other countries, Quebec. And let's really take a strong stance on that. My worry is that we may not get into a position of government in British Columbia as Greens to actually prevent this time bomb, this methane time bomb that the NDP has spent $6.6 billion on in building a fracking industry in BC, partly through their subsidies to the pipeline and to the facilities in Kitimat. But nationally, if the Greens hold the balance of power, we should make this a condition of supporting a government in a minority government situation and say, we will not accept the massive subsidies of the fossil fuel industry that the Liberals have been leading in since 2015. Those are some of the things we need to do. Cut the subsidies to zero, invest in building the east-west grid powered by renewables, and show Canadians that we have a viable, positive alternative to this methane time bomb that you alluded to in your question, Andy. Do you have a follow-up, Andy, or does that cover it? You're on mute, but it looks like it might cover it. Other questions?
There are some other questions.
Great.
There was a follow-up from Luke Randall. As a follow-up to people using technology how do you propose to better connect rural Canada to the internet?
That really should be a top priority for us, Luke. And in British Columbia, we have a fantastic connection to rural internet. We have a huge connection rate across BC. 95% of residents of British Columbia are connected to the internet. And it's because the provincial and federal governments have teamed up to make that a priority. And what I would say is we need to make a shift from investing in fossil fuels, investing in roads and other that type of infrastructure, and invest really in a serious way in broadband access, especially in rural communities. In my view, that'll regenerate economic activity in rural communities. It'll also have a huge climate impact by reducing the need to travel to work in urban centers, and it'll give an incentive for people to work from home and work online. And it'll transform, I believe, our rural communities. So that should be a top priority. In my own personal work at the Ministry of Attorney General in British Columbia, we figured out how to provide online justice services so that people could access our justice system through their smartphones and through their home computers and get better service, faster service, less expensive service, and more fair service entirely online. If you go to the Civil Resolution Tribunal, you'll see how we did that. Not only that, but during the pandemic, the only part of BC's justice system that remained in full operation was the Civil Resolution Tribunal. And it's because we managed to connect to British Columbians online. It's a model for the world, and it's a model how government should be delivering its services. And not only that, it's how a government it's an example for the world on how government should treat its employees. The first step should be federal government employees working from home. Last point, my wife, as I mentioned earlier, was a Department of Justice lawyer before she retired. We met over a legal opinion. I was there too. And we've seen a ton of change in the last 25 years. She worked from home, from British Columbia, commuted back to Ottawa through phone and computer links, and provided opinions and engaged in legal advice entirely from home remotely. If she can do it, the whole federal public service can do it. And that may be a slight exaggeration, but we really need our governments to step up and lead the way. And that'll also help put government employees into rural areas where real estate prices are low, where the cost of living is more affordable, especially when you factor in rents and mortgages, and where quality of life may well be higher. Thank you, Luke.
Luke, did you have a follow-up? Okay, so we will go to Darlene's question. As a unifier of all Greens across Canada, do you see a role for the other leadership candidates?
Yes, I do. We have some fantastic leadership candidates here. There's 9 of us running right now with different skill sets. You know, we have a PhD in astrophysics. We have people who really understand rural agriculture. We have people who are medical doctors who understand public health. If we could just get the 9 people who are running for the leadership to pull together after this election and bring in their campaign teams, fantastic campaign teams with really great organizers, many of them young organizers. I don't want to embarrass Amanda, but we have fantastic young organizers on our team. Amanda's an example. My campaign manager, Eric, is 25 years old. My financial agent is 26. We have a future in our Green Party that's really encouraging, very much diversity. So let's make sure we start by uniting the leadership candidates and their teams and turning them into a team of rivals. Abraham Lincoln did this. There's a book written about Abraham Lincoln called Team of Rivals. And let's do it in this leadership campaign. That would be a top priority for me. On October 4th, contact all the other leadership candidates and say, I really welcome you to stay in the party. What would you like to do in the party? How can we work together? As leader, that would be my top priority.
Okay, great. Darlene, did you want to follow up on that question?
No, it's fine. Thank you. Thanks, Amanda.
No problem. Okay, so I think we have come to the end of our questions. If anybody who's still on the call, if you want to raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask a question, now would be the time.
It doesn't look like it, so
Nope.
I'm going to say, oh, we have one person maybe who might be on mute.
Here, we'll try to ask him to unmute there.
Tom.
Yeah, oh, there we are. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just you talked about campaigning and whatnot. So what's your favorite style of campaigning?
Tom, if you go to my website and click on davidmerner.com, you'll see a tab there, which is listening. And it's a listening tab. And to me, the first step in campaigning is listening, really not preaching, but going to the doorstep, going to people and hearing what's important to them, what they care about. Because the Green Party has fantastic policy. We have fantastic priorities. But what we need to do is to be able to communicate in a way that addresses the concern of the people we're talking to. You know, whether it's on a Zoom call or on the doorstep, wherever we are. First, we listen and we really focus on the questions that people care about. It's one of the reasons why I try and keep my Zoom call presentations really short. So it's all about questions and answers. So if a person's coming and asking me about climate action, I'm delighted to ask. If they want to ask me about military matters, I'm very happy to talk about that. So we're going on to their important issues, not necessarily ours. One of the things, though, is that so many of these issues, including, I have the largest naval base on the West Coast in my riding here, Esquimalt-Saint-Suk. Even questions about the military and naval strategy and, you know, what we think about the shipbuilding plan. Ultimately, they relate to core green issues, like what are we going to do about the global climate emergency? How do we see the military fitting into that? So there's always a way of linking back to our priorities, but we shouldn't be, I think, lecturing people on that first. We should first be listening and then connecting the dots to people, for people. And that works. Like my father and I, who actually, my dad's on this call, Bob Merner is here, you'll see, we're really surprised by the military housing in our riding. People were very green, especially if they were under 40. And you could link their questions directly into environmental issues. And often they would be the first to ask about the environment. So that's how I like to campaign. I'm a real fan of grassroots campaigning and campaigning between elections. We started knocking on doors in December 2018, and knocked on doors for 10 months until the October 2019 election. It's one of the reasons we were able to identify 2,000 lawn sign takers and 200 volunteers. So I really am a fan of starting early, nominating candidates early, and working really hard on the ground. You know, even if it's just once a week, every weekend, starting out. And people love it when you're knocking on doors in the snow. They think you're a little crazy, but they also respect it. So that's how I like to campaign.
Snow in Vancouver? No, well, I guess they're not in Vancouver. Okay.
Yeah, you know, you're right, Tom. We only had about 5 days of snow in that campaign. It was in January, at the end of January, and we made sure to get out.
It wasn't real snow, though.
No.
Thank you, Dave.
It sounds like it's better than it really was, but that's a typical politician. Thanks for the question, Tom. Appreciate it. Any last questions, or should we call it an evening? Those were really great questions. Thank you, Tom and Luke and Rhonda and Sarah and Dave and my dad, mom and dad. Darlene, by the way, is my mom. And especially to Amanda for staying in until the bitter end. I really appreciate those who hang in there till the end. If I can't come to see you in person, we're going to have another 1 or 2 Zoom calls for New Brunswick Greens. So I hope to see you again, either in person or on Zoom. Thank you again, everyone. davidmerner.com. Click on donate or volunteer. I'd love to have you involved in my campaign. Have a good night. Good night, Amanda.
Good night.
Thanks, Mom and Dad.